welcome to Brain-Machine Interface. We're going to talk a little bit about the scientific aspect of it and also about how it appears in fiction writing. We are supposed to be 3 panelists, one bailed out on the last minute, so we only have 2. Maybe we can start by everyone introducing themselves. Swati, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Hi, I'm Swati Chavda. I'm an author, poet, and an artist. But before all that, I used to be a neurosurgeon. I have done more than 600 surgeries on the brain and spinal cord. And I had trained in India, and eventually I moved to Calgary, where I was working in the Foothills Hospital. And I was involved in research with deep brain stimulation, which was both clinical as well as lab research. So where we actually placed electrodes inside the brain for patients with movement disorders like Parkinson's, as well as there were even studies done for patients with depression. So I have some background when it comes to this thing. At least I know how the human brain functions. So hopefully I'll be able to bring some insight from that perspective. Of course, the tech aspects of it, I'm not too familiar with, but I can definitely bring some light as it pertains to the functioning of human brains. And definitely we in this panel, I'm hoping that you will ask us questions which feel more relevant to you, and we'll go ahead accordingly.
Okay, my name is Friedman. I write science fiction. I also have a YouTube channel, and I have a blog. In my blog, I write mostly about space, things that happen in space, and I have like 4.2 million views. So that's quite nice. Other than that, I'm currently working on a novel that the main character is actually a brain taken from somebody and installed into a robot. So of course, they need a brain-machine interface. So I'm not claiming to be an expert on the topic, but I did just enough research so I can talk about it to maybe 90% of the readers. And I'm sure there will be some who knows better than me, but that's life. So we can talk about that. So we can speak a little bit what happened in the real world, in progress in the field, where we stand right now. And we get some example from fiction. I'll use mostly movies. And maybe we can hear some question from the audience. We want to make it a little bit more interactive. Otherwise, it can be just a YouTube channel. We want the advantage of a well-known of a panel like this, that it's a little more interactive with the audience. So if you have any question, just type it in the chat, or if the admin can allow you to ask the question in voice, in audio, you can raise your hand. One of the 2 options. So Swati, where do we stand right now in terms of real science? Are we anyway close to having a real-time brain-machine interface? And what is the advantage of brain-machine interface compared to something like this type of interface? I guess a bit slower, a lot slower.
We actually do have firstly, I can talk a bit about what brain-machine interface is, and then we can talk about where we stand from the clinical perspective and a little bit from the research perspective. So normally our brain generates signals that are front of the brain. Usually that's where our intention to perform any action arises. That's where all our thoughts, cognitive abilities arise. And whenever we want to do something, any action-based thing, that's where the signals arise. And those signals are eventually transmitted to our output areas, such as through the nerves, they go to our muscles, and then our muscles perform the actions, whether it's our limbs or whether our eyes or our speech muscles. But the signal is generated in the brain, and it's our muscular nerves and muscles which perform the action. Now, in cases where patients cannot use their nerves or muscles for because of either disease or injury, now we have developed systems where either a machine or any kind of output device is connected to the brain, and the brain generates a signal which is then processed and decoded and translated to the output device. And it is the output device which performs the action. So that in nutshell is the brain machine interface, which can be as simple or as complex as conditions permit. So for now, clinically, we actually do have quite a few areas where work has been done and is being even refined further. For patients with paralysis, there are actually research has been done where signals are generated in their brain and they can move an external object just because by the system generating a system processing that signal and such like. Similarly, just using the intention of the brain, the signal, one can move the cursor of a mouse or of a computer and or even produce speech. So those kind of things are being done. In real life applications, things are still quite cumbersome because of not just cost, but complexity and the need for maintenance, need for regular calibration and constant input. So things are moving forward, but there's a lot more room for further development there.
Yeah, I know of a company, for example, like Neuralinks by Elon Musk.
Yeah.
So I know that they are doing some experiments. So they basically what they do, they drill a little hole on the scalp, and then they insert some kind of sensor to the brain, and then they try to get the signals from the neuron in order to operate machinery. The intention, at least initially, is to address issue like injuries or disability. Some days unconsciousness or unconscious, and someone who is conscious but still paralyzed or unable to function, and this is going to allow that person to interact with the outside world or with the computer. I know I think it was a chimpanzee that they managed to do a surgery on a chimpanzee, was able to play a video game just using the brain without any hands or a voice or any other sensory. So that's where it stands right now. In the long run, I think one of the purposes for establishing the company is to, one of the existential risks to humanity is super general artificial intelligence. So computers are advancing very, very fast. Google have a very DeepMind company that, or sub-company part of Alpha, that can, I think it used to beat the #1 Go player in the world, and now it's StarCraft, and it's doing a lot of more and more things better than humans. The fear is that at some point artificial intelligence will be a lot more advanced, a lot more intelligent than us, and they can do, like the Terminator scenario, or they can do whatever they want, or like if they want to do something, they can just go over us. Because they are a lot more intelligent than us, it will be very difficult to confine them. And the idea is to merge with machines. So, and the problem we have right now with merging with machine, so human brain will be part of the system, is that the interface is very, very, very slow. Like we speak, we type command on the computer, on a keyboard, and it's like a few bytes. I don't know how fast people can type, but it's a few hundred bytes per minute. It's not very fast. So the idea is if your computer will be able to connect directly to your brain, then we'll be able to communicate a lot faster, and then maybe we will enhance the human intelligence, human capacity, and we will merge eventually with AI, and thus we will be, since we are part of the AI, maybe they don't want to do something bad to us or ignore us or take us out of the loop for some reason. So that's the main reason for that. Other than that, I don't know, in reality, it could be used for, the function is, it could be almost limitless. We can have something like Star Trek holodeck. If you want, we can bring some example, Matrix or the Borg from Star Trek, altered carbon. Ghost in a Shell. If you have any specific movie you want to talk about, Elysium, it's an exoskeleton connect directly to the brain, and you're able to operate machinery, heavy machinery, directly without pushing buttons, so it's a lot faster. So what we can do with it, once the technology works very, very well, and it's not damaging to the brain, and it's very well tuned, are almost limitless. So do you want to speak about one of the movie? Let's talk maybe about the metrics. Can we connect? You think in the future we'll be able to connect some kind of interface that will be connected to all as our sensor, including video, audio, smell, touch, taste, so we can create an environment, a virtual environment, or augmented reality that is indistinguishable from real reality, just because the resolution is so high, and it's engaged all the sensor, including the body. Somebody can touch you on the shoulder and you feel it. Do you think such a scenario could be possible?
I mean, anything is possible. I think Three-Body Problem did this quite in quite an intriguing way as well. Even in that they had this whole game where the person had to play and the virtual thing. I think at this point, see, even that Elon Musk, he always talks about how he was always inspired by science fiction when he was younger. And I think as authors of speculative fiction, it is up to us to push the frontiers when it comes to this, because medically, I think we are still just taking baby steps in this. And it is a long way before we can actually even contemplate something of that level. But that doesn't mean it's not doable. Anything is doable, actually, if you project it far enough in the future. And I think it's, as speculative fiction authors, we can actually explore so much of it, and there is so much room for us to talk about even the ethical aspects of it, or even the limitations. Like right now, one of the real life limitations when it comes to using any kind of brain machine interface is the amount of attention the person is forced to use. Just to move a cursor, they have to use their full attention, because the attention is a function of intention. And to produce that signal, one has to first have that level of attention, and then it has to be sustained attention for a period of time to actually get an output going. And then not just having the output, but then there is a feedback based on whatever the output generates, and then one has to pay attention to the feedback, keep calibrating. So there is so much which happens automatically in our brains right now, which we're not even aware of. But when someone is using a brain machine interface, they have to intentionally do each of these steps, and it does require quite a bit of training. So I think there is the limitation of human mind also comes into the play. And I think as authors, that is one of the areas we can explore. Like if we are writing about a race or a set of superior human beings who are being produced with enhanced powers using these devices, how much training they would have to undergo just to be able to sustain that level of attention.
Okay, I could talk about the Borg from Star Trek. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yes.
The Borg from Star Trek, I think they have nanobots, so the technology is a lot more advanced than what we can do. But I don't think they need a lot of training. I think simply because the understanding of how the human brain or the brain of other species works, so they are able to interface with it in such a way that it's either more intuitive to the person, or they call it a drone, to interact with the technology, and also for the technology to control the drone on the other way. So what I'm trying to get is that maybe because once we know more about how the human brain works, maybe the learning aspect could be shortened down. And just because we know exactly how to connect to the visual cortex or the audio functionality, I'm not sure exactly all the, probably, I don't know. It's not the neocortex and the frontal lobe, it's how we think, but not too familiar with the component of the brain. But I'm sure people who are developing this technology at some point, they would be able to connect directly to it. And if we are able to control all the sensors, maybe we can, the learning curve will be a lot shorter.
I think medically we are nowhere in that. This is not anywhere in the realm of possibility as it stands right now. And I think that's where we come in as storytellers, because we can, in our stories, we can develop this, and who knows, the future scientists would take inspiration from that.
And about learning, do you think it will be possible to have something like in the Matrix? Okay, now I want to learn Kung Fu or learn how to fly a Bell 212 helicopter and learn it within a minute or so?
Definitely not. Definitely. It's too complex.
So it will not be possible to change the synopsis?
No, it's just that, see, there is a lot of myth about how brain functions that people believe, not just like even many doctors who are not trained into neurosciences, they also believe that brains have these very specific centers which do specific things. And to some extent that is true. But then each of the tasks is not really encoded. Each of the complex tasks is not really encoded in one particular region. It's a dynamic thing. It's a neural pathway, and it's ever changing, ever evolving. And it requires so much of, it depends so much on moment to moment feedback, live feedback, that it just cannot be just transplanted from elsewhere in toto. It has to be something which has to be developed and constantly refined and calibrated and recalibrated every moment. So I feel like it in fiction, definitely it's a plausible idea, but in a real life scenario, I don't see that happening.
So we cannot learn the whole, everything we learn in school in 2 minutes by being plugged in. Oh, that's a bummer.
I don't think so.
And I think I have a question from the audience. I'll read the question. How far away is the idea of a port into a skull, and who decide if it's a USB 3 or Thunderbolt, etc.? So we have I don't know, I guess something like what Neuralink is doing, or something like the Matrix, that you can plug and unplug. Things like that are coming.
Not very sure I understand the question.
Okay, do you think it will have some sort of a plug in the head, in the skull someplace, that we can connect or disconnect from, the brain can connect or disconnect from the external computer system? Similar to how it was done in the Matrix. The Matrix, you could unplug whenever you want.
Yeah, to some extent, we are already doing that through deep brain stimulation, which is actually something which has practical clinical applications even now, especially in patients with movement disorders such as Parkinson's. It has given excellent results. And what we do is that the patient is, first we do MRIs, the CT scans to the patient, and we place the frame around it, and the frame has the metallic landmarks. So we can use those landmarks to map the where we are going to put the electrode in three-dimensional way. Then we take the patient with the frame in the operating room. Patient is awake. We just give local anesthesia. We drill a hole. We put the electrode according to the trajectory calculated by that earlier scan. And once that electrode reaches the exact position, we deliver an electric pulse. And that pulse, based on that, we actually, since the patient is awake, we can see how much their tremors improve, how much their limb rigidity improves. And based on the optimum improvement we are looking for, we can set the exact place and the amplitude of the electric current, and we keep the device electrode inside. Then and the wiring is brought out from under the skull, under the skin of the skull, neck, and everywhere, and the controlling battery is in the abdomen. It's kind of like a cardiac pacemaker. This is a brain pacemaker, and we are practically using it to control the tremors for Parkinson's patients, and it gives excellent results for those who have not responded to medications or who have reached the maximum medications before they get side effects. It is also providing good results in certain types of depressions, refractory depressions. So, I mean, who knows, in future, it can actually be used to control someone's emotions, like whether in a good or evil way. That is definitely in the realm of possibility in a practical way.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to it, but what we are talking about is the electrodes that are connected through the skull. So it's probably not going to be a USB device, but it's on an interface that's dedicated for the brain. That's what I think. Yeah. With another comment, there's a story, the latest for on spec with humans that can have chip inserted in the cortex.
Yeah.
It's a comment, it's not a question.
Yeah.
And we got one. Yeah.
And I think that is kind of what we are doing with neuromodulation.
So we have I saw some YouTube channel that people insert a chip into their hands. So I don't know how it is connected to the nerve system. And we have another question. Does every person's brain have a unique pattern of connections, or is there a lot of similarity between different brains? Does the culture, upbringing result in a very different brain patterns?
There is some basic similarity between different brains for sure. Like, I mean, we know that there is a particular area where which is control of motor system. There's a particular area which is in control of the sensory system. And even within this region, there are representations of hand, legs, different parts of body. There's actually an actual homunculus there, which you can see that it's pretty interesting. So yes, there is similarity at a certain level, especially anatomically. But when it comes to the neural pathways, there is each person has their unique wiring based on the experiences they have had in life and the way they have lived, basically. Because neural pathways are like the ruts created when a vehicle passes on the road. Every time you repeat an action or a thought, the pathway strengthens. And so the kind of life you have lived or kind of thoughts you have had, it will determine your neural pathways. But these are ever evolving. So, there's neuroplasticity, and that itself is a huge field where a lot of work is being done. But these pathways can be changed. So there are as many patterns of pathways as there are human beings in the world.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to it. My background is more from computer science. I'm system admin, senior system admin in my day job. So now, in terms of computer science, in terms of evolution, the human bodies, the information to build the human bodies come from the DNA that have a few hundred million instruction sets. So that's not a very big, it's just 1 and 8 zeros after that. While the number of pathways in the brain, there are different opinions if we're getting it into quantum or not, but it's something between 10 to the power of 16 and 10 to the power of 18 pathways. So that's a lot more zeros. So we have something that is relatively simple, like DNA, that have a limited instruction sets. creating something that is, they do it by repeating the pattern again and again and again, and then the brain learn by itself from life experience and create its own pathway. So we have a much, much more complex system than the DNA. So the DNA between different people is, I would say, not identical, but maybe more similar, but the brain has evolved, or once the baby was born, even before it was born, once the brain is at a certain level of development, he's developing in a different way in each person, depends on his experience, what that person learn and study and so eat, all this stuff. And another thing that I can add, I know that people who get, they have some part of the brain is function for, is responsible for certain functionality, and people that have stroke, that part of their brain is damaged, then they cannot operate their hand, they can go to physiotherapy, and then another part of the brain learn how to do this function.
Yes.
So of course, for that person that had a stroke, eventually that person will learn how to use the hand or the leg that was paralyzed before because of that part of damage in the brain, and a different part of the brain will be able to assume that functionality. It's like learning to walk again, learning everything from scratch, but it is done in a different part of the brain. So it is possible the different part of the brain in different people will be responsible for the same functionality. So having similarity, I guess it's not trivial. That's what I have
and especially if there's brain damage in childhood or early life, there is a huge scope of other areas of brain taking over that function, and the classical anatomical area is supposedly responsible for a function might be gone, but the neighboring areas take over and provide the function. So like Ron said, there is definitely that level of neuroplasticity. Like human brain is amazing.
Yeah, so that's going to pose a big challenge to the companies or the organization that develop brain-machine interface, because they probably have to learn how each brain individually work in order to optimize the connection on the interface. Okay. We have one more question. I will read it. Wikipedia mentioned possibility of flexible polymers and neutral dust as possible wireless interface thought.
It's not
wireless interface to the brain, so you don't need to make a hole in the skull.
Yeah, but this this particular level of technology, we're not using it in clinical applications yet. There's definitely some research being done, but in a clinical setting, it's not yet in use.
Yeah. Do you think it will be possible? This is not a question from Dennis. It's a question from some of the movie I saw, like maybe Darth Vader from Star Wars. That you will. Okay, so that's either take the brain and place it inside a robot. So of course you need to. That's Ghost in a Shell, basically. So basically you need to also have some kind of heart and supply nutrition and supply oxygen to the brain, or the most basic function like lungs and heart and some of the blood circulation are still there, but you replace the hands, the legs, something like Darth Vader, and then you have a brain-machine interface that control the body parts. So you can even maybe add additional limbs like Inspector Gadget. You can have all kind of machinery that can operate from his brain. So, what is your thought about that? That adding additional limbs or replacing limbs, or even take the whole brain and put it inside the machine, inside the robot?
I think from where we stand right now, it does not seem plausible. But again, like in future, one never knows what kind of new technology comes along, and we might be able to leverage that. Some of the limitations we face when it comes to trying something like that is the millions of connections the brain has, just the nerves as well as blood vessels. And each area is like, when you look at the tiny blood vessels inside the brainstem, like brainstem is one of the most vital areas which decide whether one lives or dies, like it controls respiration and heartbeat and everything. And the area is so small, and within that tiny area, there are so many blood vessels, and even damage to a micromillimeter one of those can really alter whether the person can breathe or not breathe. So in order to have those level of connection into another system, like to have the whole brain function into another system, we would need to provide the connections for the entire brain. And it just doesn't seem technically feasible. One way I see there's a possible way around it is, if the major channels of blood supply are maintained, then one would hope that there'll be surrounding tiny vessels which would grow, which does happen in certain kinds of diseases. Actually, when one blood supply is cut off, the surrounding, like you mentioned about the neuroplasticity, the neighboring areas of brain take over. Say, similarly, blood vessels as well can grow from other vessels. And that might be an area worth exploring in animals and seeing if those kind of connections form. But we are very, 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 very far from anything like that in a practical scenario.
And what about replacing a limb like Darth Vader?
Limb is, in fact, it can be done, and it's even being done to a great extent. So that's definitely, yes, that's very much being done.
So no Ghost in a Shell yet, but Darth Vader maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we should get a little bit more into what people here, most of them are either writers or readers, what we can do in terms of fiction when we want to use this exciting technology. So what do you think we can do in the, let's say, in near future of a few decades with this technology? What can be done? And then I'll add maybe some of my thoughts.
Yeah, I think firstly, a lot of the kind of technology you want to show in fiction of this nature depends on the kind of society or the government or the kind of world it is. Like, is it the kind of world where there are going to be a lot of wars? Because this technology can be extrapolated into war. Somebody sitting at home and sending extensions of themselves out in the field doing battle. It can be used for entertainment, like video games. Those kind of things are already being done to some extent, like holodeck kind of stuff as well, which is an immersive. It can be used both as entertainment or even as training, putting somebody in that immersive environment and learning to perform a surgery or perform any kind of complex maneuvering. That's also for educational purposes, entertainment, education, exploration, sending someone deep into the ocean, not physically, but an extension of themselves, while their brain is sitting safe somewhere. So, and of course, war, destructive things. So there are a lot of possibilities. And as a speculative fiction author, I just love how much possibilities there are.
Yeah, in fiction, I don't recall anything that related to exploration, but war and entertainment most definitely did. There was a movie in the 1980s called Firefox that the Soviets developed a new airplane that connect to the brain, and then the instincts of the pilot worked a lot faster, so he had better maneuverability. And there's a newer set of movies called Pacific Rim that people are so the person's still intact, but he connected to some kind of interface, so the brain could control a huge mech warrior or huge machine that could fight monsters. So you can control. And of course, there was the movie Elysium, when it was an extra skeletal. I don't know, maybe Iron Man as well, the brain machine interface. The way he can control his external armor or suit that to do complex action. And Yeah, so you can do that. You can do exploration. And what you said about the entertainment, this could be useful if you take long voyages to Mars, for example. Instead of using for entertainment something that looks like this, you can maybe connect to the brain directly and then have a 3D video that you totally immerse into the simulation. So if you have a spaceship that is very, very cramped, you have a very tiny room with, it's not convenient to stay in this environment for a few months. And then when you came to Mars, you have probably most of the time have to live underground. So this is be a good way either for education or for entertainment. So relieve psychological stress of living for a very long time in a very confined space. So I can see this being used in space exploration. Okay. Even Star Trek, they have holodeck. So holodeck is not a brain machine interface, but maybe you can do it in a lot smaller place with something similar to that. Yeah, so there is another comment on the chat. Spock brain from the original Star Trek dealt with full brain transplant to machine. Okay. It's a comment.
I think there was also one short story I had read long ago, in which there was a scientist whose brain was placed in a nutritional environment, and just with his globe of the eyes, they could track the environment. And then his wife, I think they have a terrible marriage, and his wife comes and basically she just tortures him every day. Like all the things he was a very controlling husband, and she took her revenge by visiting him every day and doing stuff in front of him, all the things which he used to prevent her from doing. And he was just a brain. He had no output system. So he just had to watch it, and he was helpless, and he was stuck there forever just watching that. I forgot I think it was by one of the well-known authors. It was a short story, horror kind of a short story. I read it long ago.
Yeah, I think I saw this episode of like all the TV series. Something with Zone, Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Something. And I think there was also a movie not long ago called Alita that had a similar concept. So the Alita itself, it has the whole head plus the spine, and that was installed in the machine. So I don't know how the brain survived, because you do need a respiration system and blood system, but it works in fiction, I guess. What other Mars Attack? I remember I saw some took brain and install it either in a dog or in a box. Yeah, fun stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so any more questions from the audience? Okay, so we spoke about entertainment, we spoke about education, fast data transfer. Do we want to talk about merging with AI? Suppose there is a super intelligence entity or entities, and the human brain wants to interface with them at a very, very fast speed and maybe be part of the system. Do you see such a future to ever become a reality? No, computer faster, more powerful than us. This is coming. We are decades, not very far from there. It's coming this century.
Yeah.
But I think a human brain can still be part of the system.
I think so. I think that is definitely a possibility. And I think I can actually see human beings wanting to do that as well, because the computational system of a human brain, the speed of it can never match what an actual AI will be able to do, what an AI can do even now in certain conditions. So people will always want to enhance themselves in some way, and having that extra power, it gives them an edge. So I can definitely see people doing that, and it's a prosthetic in a way, which is definitely doable. It may not be something which is implanted directly, or it even could be. It can just be something external, wearable technology, but there's definitely a possibility, and so many ways things can go wrong as well.
Yeah, this is a high risk before we develop all this technology that probably going to help humanity a lot. There is a risk that something may go sideways and
Yeah.
will not work as expected.
Yeah.
Maybe. So I know that probably in things like games or making a decision based on external data, a lot of time computers may be able to get a better decision than us.
Mm.
Maybe we have a little bit more advantage in, I don't know, if emotion, making decision based on emotions, or
Yeah. I think
so
that manual input in a situation of crisis, I wonder that manual input might make a difference compared to an algorithm-based decision making. That might actually be the winning shot eventually. Who knows? But
so
do you see, like, suppose such a technology existed, what kind of ramifications that would have on the overall world, like even things like the society at large or the systems, even things like families or communities or governments or that economy, all those levels? I know, like I know you're going to be presenting about NFTs and blockchain and all that. Like, do you see how does that intersect with this kind of a thing?
how blockchain could be intersect with the brain-machine interface?
Like the AI enhanced human brain function, or this is the kind of society where this would be possible.
Oh, this is a thing that I wasn't thinking about it, so I thought this is completely different. But I spoke with some organization that talked about life enhancement, and then they start talking about blockchain and how to combine the two. I don't think I see a direct connection. Blockchain is mostly a database that instead of being centralized in one place, it's distributed over a very large number of computers. So how is that? I guess we can have using a new kind of organization instead of have a corporation. We can have a different way of organization that the individual, instead of owning the stocks, they can be more involved in getting some of the money, some of the decision making, and information is distributed rather than concentrated. But if it can be done could it be merged somehow with brain-machine interface? Brain-machine interface, the way I see it, is either to make fast, to have a different sensory, either augmented reality or virtual reality, or to interface faster with machine, or to control machine directly rather than through hands or voice or other interfaces that we have. So it's mostly about faster communication. So maybe it could be integrated with blockchain. Don't know. I guess it is.
No, I was thinking more like in terms of those evil corporations. Like suppose there's one which this is the same corporation which has stakes in both that AI, which is integrated with the human brain, as well as the whole blockchain and the whatever further technology develops from that in future. Yeah. That would be an interesting way to area to explore as authors.
Okay, so yeah, so as authors, I think one thing is that brain-machine interface, if the technology works very, very well, the people who will use it have a huge advantage over people who don't use it.
Yeah.
So you can get a better job, you can earn more money, you can make better decisions than people who choose not to use it. But on other hand, the risk that you tell us, it's make us more vulnerable to attack. Like, can we be affected by a computer virus or a Trojan, or I don't know, bomb? We have a lot of boomers that not boomers. Sorry, no, I apologize to all the boomers.
Zoom bombers.
Zoom bombers. We love Zoom boomers. We don't love Zoom bombers. So imagine that somebody invade your brain and start to mess around, either make a decision for you, or so this could be very, very risky, either by people who are trying to hack the system, or if it's controlled by a big corporation or a big entity. I don't know what to say, that Google are evil or something, or
Yeah. I mean, imagine if
They will have a lot of
somebody,
control.
yeah, if somebody spends a lot of money to have their child's brain enhanced with a neuroprosthetic, and then somebody, a hijacker or someone, the hacker hacks into it and starts controlling your child, and then they say
Yeah.
that unless you pay us, unless you do this for us, your child will be under our control.
Yeah, actually, in my short story collection of Escape Velocity, what happened on Earth is that there is an artificial intelligence that was able through brain-machine interface. That she came from a video game, and she was built to be evil, and she managed to control people on the outside world and actually pretty much the control of the planet.
Yeah.
So yeah, so one entity, it could be either a corporation or a person or an AI, could take control of people in that way, definitely. Just because of the incentive to people wants to use the technology to be ahead, but they it's open to a new type of risk, and it could be interesting to write stories about that. We have about 3 minutes left. Anyone have any question? Okay, so let's pick if nobody have question, let's pick a story, a movie, and talk about it. Let's see what's Robocop. You want to talk about Robocop?
I have very good memories of watching that as a child.
So what do you think? It will be possible to somebody who is very close to being brain dead to revive him in a human robot and control? Actually, that's a corporation that controls the person. And he was trying to gain control over his own body.
Yeah.
That's a good connection to your previous question.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think in real life, it's probably not likely to happen in near future, but in fiction, even the level of technology we do have right now and the amount of research that's being done, that itself opens so many doors for new types of new plot devices we can use in our stories. Because with every advance which we are doing for good, it also opens doors for the bad ones to use it. So it's just like the atomic technology. I mean, you use it for good, and there are people who use it for bad stuff.
Yeah,
so.
Steam engine, everything can be used for good or used for bad.
Yeah.
The only difference here is it's maybe humans will lose control and an entity that you create will take over.
Yeah.
Okay, so we basically run out of time. We have about less than 1 minute left, so I think we should say goodbye and thank you very much for joining us for this panel.